Yesterday, you heard several of our main stage presenters speak to both the challenges and opportunities at our doorstep. Not only did we reflect on the past 40 years, but we looked ahead towards the next 40 and how we can continue to build and strengthen our position. Even through tough times, we've persevered, and Angus breeders have continued to keep an eye on the future. This morning, we will hear from someone who, like many of you, understands firsthand the value of perseverance and overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to achieve victory. As portrayed by Chris Hemsworth in the major motion picture 12 Strong, Mark Nutsch will share the true life story of helping lead what is considered the most successful unconventional warfare campaign in modern history. Following the attacks on 9/11, Nutsch led a heroic 12-man team of U.S. Special Forces on a covert mission to Afghanistan, riding to war on horses to fight the enemy. All of this side by side with their Muslim counterparts. Through it all, the lessons he learned in working with a diverse team and a capacity to persevere in successfully accomplishing their mission is certainly relevant for every single person in this room. So let's take a quick look at the trailer for 12 Strong.
You taking me to school again?
And picking you up.
Daddy.
Two planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack.
What is that, a part of some drill?
Ain't no drill.
19 men attacked our country. The 12 of you will be the first ones to fight back.
How do you love your family and leave them to go to war?
I have 2 hours. I'll be really quick.
Not a chance. Holding out is the only way I can guarantee you come back to me.
War's gonna be over in like a week.
I don't care how long you're gone, as long as you come back.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4!
Every step we take is gonna be on a minefield from 100 different wars.
Odds are we're not all gonna make it out of this one.
If we don't take that city, World Trade Center's just the beginning. We're teaming up with the general of the Northern Alliance that we know nothing about. General, you show me exactly where we're going.
Over the mountains. We take horses.
Who's ridden before? Anyone?
Summer camp when I was 9.
Spring break, but I was pretty hammered. Does it have a name? The name!
Great, this will be fun.
We're outnumbered. 50,000 Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters. We're on our own. I can't order anyone to do this. Do you want to surrender? Keep your finger on the trigger. Just stay there.
Oh, God.
Well, I won't back down.
There's no playbook here. We're gonna have to write it ourselves.
No, I won't back down.
I ain't losing one man on this team.
You could stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down.
We're fighting with horsemen against tanks.
Hey,
The greatest weapon in history is this.
baby, there ain't no easy way out.
If you die, that's a letter you and your wife are gonna wish you wrote.
I made her a promise. I'm coming home.
Won't back down.
12 Strong, the declassified true story of the horse soldiers.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, thank you all for coming out today and having me here at your annual convention. It's an honor and a privilege to share a little bit about the real men and the real mission. Now, we had that incredible experience with this feature film that portrays us. There are some aspects that are fictional, but they got this part right. Chris Hemsworth, an incredible Australian actor, portrays me in this film. And it's incredible that they have actors portraying every member of my team that experienced that mission 17 years ago today. We were still in it. We're going to talk a little bit about throughout my career of 24 years in active and reserve service in the U.S. Army in our special operations community, particularly while serving as an Army Green Beret. And I appreciate the honor to represent any other veterans that are out here in our larger veteran community. Thank you. Everyone in this audience remembers September 11, 2001, that horrible day when nearly 3,000 American and international citizens were murdered by al-Qaeda terrorists. While America was staring at that smoldering pile in New York City, that hole in the wall in the Pentagon, or that field in Pennsylvania, I assure you, your U.S. Special Operations Command, your Department of Defense headquarters, and a number of intelligence agencies were working hard to figure out who had just attacked America and what strategies could be put forth. And a main strategy that was selected, that President Bush chose, was to match teams of CIA operatives with teams of Army Special Forces. Now, on September 10th, I had just completed 2 years as a Special Forces captain, as a detachment commander of a 12-man A-team. And our focus was the Middle East. And we had deployed half a dozen times throughout the Middle East into the former Soviet Republic of Uzbekistan. September 10th, I had just ended that 2 years. I took a new assignment as a staff officer. On September 14th, my wife, Amy, was 6.5 months pregnant, high risk with our first daughter. I had 2 young stepsons, 3 and 4 years old. And we were in a Babies R Us in Nashville, Tennessee, when I got a phone call from my team sergeant, the team I had just left. And he gives me the brevity words that I need to return to the unit immediately and bring all my gear. And about 30 seconds later, I got another phone call from my new boss, and he says, you need to get back here, you need to report to the colonel immediately. And I knew right then and there that my team, my brothers and I, had been picked for one of those missions. Like any Green Beret, I let out a whoop and a holler because I knew I was going to war with my brothers that I had worked and trained hard throughout my career. And I look at my wife, Amy. She had heard the call. She knew the significance, she knew the meaning. And she said, you gotta go. And we picked out a baby name on that drive back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where our unit was based. Now, I wanted to share a little bit with you about my background. Throughout that career, I had tried out for some of the hardest special operations units you can get into in the U.S. Army. They make it easy to quit, and you learn things about yourself and you learn things about your teammates as you go through some of that tough training. But early on in my career, there was this phrase, when you have but one shot at something, make it count. Make it count. And I strove to live up to that. That's fine. This is a documentary clip that I wish to share with you.
American cowboy, U.S. cavalry heritage. Was probably on a horse before I could walk. You know, I'd studied U.S. and Confederate cavalry commanders. We had walked the battlefields of Gettysburg and down through the Tennessee campaign. It was not lost on me that here I am in the 21st century, and I'm leading a 19th century cavalry.
They're in armored vehicles and pickup trucks. They're tied to their fuel depots, and so we were able to cut them off from reinforcement and cut them off from retreat.
Now, I grew up in the Flint Hills of north central Kansas. My family still ranches there. Maybe like some of you, when I was in high school, I was the captain of my cow tipping team. Anyone out here? We rodeoed. Some kids played other sports. My family and other families from that community, we rodeoed. Rodeoed as kids. We rodeoed through high school. I want to point out my team roping partner. If Carl Langvart of Alta Vista, Kansas would please stand. I know Carl and his family and his wife Amy are here. I see you hiding back there. So Carl and I used to team rope across Kansas in high school, and I would go on to Kansas State University and rodeo for 2 years there at the collegiate level in team roping and calf roping. But who knew that that upbringing on a Kansas cattle ranch and those lessons in stubborn perseverance and grit and resilience would pay off in ways immeasurable. The Army on 9/11 was not training any of us how to ride horseback. And the fact that I grew up on a ranch riding and roping had no bearing in the fact when my team was picked for our mission. This is a graphic I wanted to share with you that was actually given. Now, when a Special Forces team goes into isolation, you're cut off from the world. And you're planning, you're intensely focused on the mission that they have given you. There was no existing plan, folks. And so my smart sergeants and I start asking questions, and we have a vision for what we think Special Forces and our team can do and be involved in. And we started to learn about these different ethnic leaders in Afghanistan. And these areas in this photo that are in orange are what analysts loosely believed were held by militia resistance groups that were already fighting actively against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And then there were questions about, can we work with these groups, leverage their capabilities to help fight against the Taliban, overthrow their regime, find Al-Qaeda, and find these folks that had just attacked America. Now, when we went into isolation, there were so many questions we could not answer. And we realized quickly, no one can answer them. And we have to get someone in on the ground. And we let our chain of command know, send me, send us. We're the team that wants this mission. When they finally gave us that mission, we had 48 hours to be ready to insert. 48 hours before we would board a helicopter to fly into northern Afghanistan. This is my Special Forces team in isolation. That's that planning tent. We don't look very soldierly. Early on, another Special Forces team was to insert right ahead of us, and the area of Afghanistan they were going, that Afghan commander that had been contacted, he did not want an overt American uniform presence. So they ran out in the country of Uzbekistan in a secret base at that point where we were based at, and they bought us this local corduroy clothing. Now, a Special Forces team, these 12 guys, they're commanded by a captain. We have a chief warrant officer who's a sergeant that's become an officer, and he was my deputy commander. And then I have a senior sergeant who is our operations sergeant. I have another senior sergeant that's an intelligence sergeant, and the four of us make up the leadership of that team. The other 8 guys of that team make up 2 weapons specialists, 2 communication specialists, 2 explosives and logistics experts, and 2 Special Forces medics. It may surprise you to know that our team was very senior. Our average age was 32. We weren't a bunch of young guys. Our average age was 32 years old. We averaged 8 years already in service in the Army. 5 of my 12-man team, including my senior sergeants, had already been Special Forces combat veterans. They had deployed throughout the Middle East. They'd been in Desert Storm, Somalia, Bosnia, other places. Now, unlike Navy SEALs or Army Rangers or the Marine Special Operations, Green Berets, when you go through training, they give you cultural training as well and language training. And all of us had to learn a language. For me, it was caveman Russian. It was basic Russian. 2 of my sergeants also spoke Russian. The rest of my team spoke different dialects of Arabic or other regional dialects from there. But 3 of my sergeants were very fluent in speaking Arabic, and that would pay off. 10 out of 12 of us were married. 9 of the 10 couples had 2 or more children. So we were not young single guys going off to war for this mission. But we knew the historical significance, and that was not lost on us. It may surprise you to know my pack, when I carried in that night of 19 October, included $1 million of your taxpayer money and 10 bottles of vodka. What special capabilities enable your team? We had to get there. Now, when I was growing up in those farming and ranching communities, it was the sale barns, maybe like Junction City, Kansas sale barn, or as your Valley vet, those veterinarians that you had such a close partnership with. For Special Forces, we have to ride in this helicopter. This is an amazing feat technologically. You have an Air Force Special Operations helicopter flying at near stall speed. It's a flying fuel tank. And you have a helicopter, an Army Special Operations helicopter that's flying at its maximum airspeed, and they're plugging in there getting gas. But these crews are so well trained, they do that at night, they do it blacked out, and they do it at about 400 foot above the ground. I want to share with you a little Department of Defense case study film clip about our insertion. All 12 members of my team would be in the back of a helicopter, just like this one shown here.
17 October 2001. The 160th prepares to infiltrate 2 Special Forces A teams to join with Northern Alliance fighters and coordinate their attacks. Each team is a regionally oriented multilingual unit consisting of 12 highly skilled soldiers who are cross-trained and extremely adaptable.
So we've talked about kind of the background of my teammates. We're very cross-trained. Even though you may have a particular specialty as medics or communicators or weapons, every guy on the team was cross-trained in how to employ those weapons, how to talk on that radio. Again, I said this was so early in the process, we're still trying to figure things out. We didn't fully understand what we were getting into. I want to share another video clip with you from that case study.
At 0200 hours, the unarmed MH-47 drops ODA 595 at LZ Albatross. Through the night, Tiger II waits for General Dostum. He is known as a brutal warlord who has made and broken alliances with many factions. What will the morning bring? The answer comes in a burst of hoofbeats.
First, about 20 horsemen came galloping up. They're armed to the teeth, looking pretty rough. You know, the heavy beards, your typical Soviet small arms. It's what they possessed: light machine guns, AK-47s, RPGs, and about 10 minutes behind them, another 30 horsemen arrived with General Dostum.
To their relief, they receive a warm welcome and follow the horsemen to Dostum's headquarters, a 4-hour ride deep into the mountains. Only one member of ODA 595 is an experienced rider.
It was an incredible, we were going up stuff that, a foot wide, you're 1,000 feet up on a cliff that you knew if you fell, you were dead.
This was our first chapter in the Wild Wild West events that we would participate in every day.
This became our team, 19th century horsemen that have a legacy that goes back to Genghis Khan and conquering that world. They were a horse culture, and I could relate to them through that means as well as others. But they're armed with 20th century weapons. Now, General Dostum, before the rise of the Taliban, had commanded the Afghan army. They had modern tanks, they had Soviet jet fighters and helicopters. And now I meet this man in the mountains, and his largest weapon is a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. And I see how poorly equipped and ill-armed they are with these AK-47 rifles and these other Soviet arms that my team was familiar with. But what my Special Forces team brought was the 21st century technology. We have night vision goggles, we got lasers on our weapons, we demonstrate our proficiency day and night. I had 9 out of 12 guys were special operations snipers, but we knew that wasn't exactly our role. We could do that if we needed to, but our role was to advise and assist and see, can we work with this group? Can we work with these other groups? And what could be done as options? We have these incredible, I wish I'd invested in Garmin GPS. Back then, the Army was issuing you a 10-pound brick. You got 2 for the whole team that was their version of the military GPS. You couldn't find that battery anywhere else in the world. But we ran out as we were preparing to leave Kentucky and Tennessee and our families to fly across. We ran out and we bought Garmin GPS Vistas at places like Cabela's and Bass Pro and REI and other outfitters. And we were buying all this high altitude mountain gear that we didn't have. And we're learning how to use these devices. We were so far early in this, we didn't have the digital topographic map layer to even insert and load into those devices. But those devices were invaluable because they would help us mark trails, they would help us mark drop zones, they would help us map out where paths through minefields were, or where we could cross a river. And then we had these incredible radios, satellite-capable radios that would allow us to talk around the world, talk back to the US, talk to our commander that was over 200 miles away. And it allowed my team to split out and talk over that terrain in those mountains. And most importantly, it would allow us to talk with this aerial armada of aircraft that came overhead. So we had to begin building collaborative partnerships from the very beginning. While we were in planning, we were introduced to a CIA team that would be our teammates throughout the course of that mission, at every turn and every major event. And so we're getting to know those guys, what each can bring to the fight. And it was very unifying right after 9/11. It didn't matter what agency or department you were from. You're all Americans and you're working together. And it was, here's what I can do. Here's what we can do. Here's our authorities and permissions. It was an incredible unifying event. I'm having to work with General Dostum and understand what the situation is. And he's laying down this incredible map. And it's got all the positions of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and that fire hose, all those questions. Then we start to answer. And I see General Dostum is building collaborative relationships because he's bringing these different militia commanders together from different counties, from different states. And we would bring them together and have a meeting and talk about what could be done and what resources and capability they could bring to bear. And then my team is having to work collaboratively with that aerial armada overhead. We had 2 carrier groups, Naval and Marine Corps aviators coming off of aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean. We have Air Force pilots flying out of the Middle Eastern countries. And we have these antiquated B-52 aircraft that were a nuclear deterrent. Well, now they're using precision-guided munitions, and they're flying off of an island in the Indian Ocean. Now, unlike you folks here today, these pilots, they had to sit in that cockpit for 10 to 14 hours, and they have to endure 1 or 2 aerial refuelings to get over Afghanistan, get in the stack, as we call it, and employ their munitions. And 1 or 2 aerial refuelings to land back on that aircraft carrier or back at that base. And there's a steep learning curve, not just on the part of my team on the ground, but for all those incredible pilots that time after time would come in and deliver ordnance, or they would come in and deliver much needed supplies every night. We're working with these different resistance groups, and we didn't fully understand the history and rivalry that these groups had in that country. We had Commander Atta that led the Tajiks. We had General Dostum, that's the leader of the Uzbeks. And we have Commander Moakek, that's the leader of the Hazaras. And the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda have been extremely brutal on the Hazaras to the level of ethnic cleansing. In 1998, they captured a major city. They defeated General Dostum at that point, and they took over the whole country. And then they went on a 3-day killing spree, and they murdered a number of the Hazara citizens. They'd been desperately crying out for help from America and from the international community. And for them, September 11th was a saving thing because it shed light on the horrible circumstances and situation that was happening in Afghanistan. Now these resistance groups, they have rivalries, but we didn't fully understand it. You know, growing up in Kansas, then it was the Big 8, Big 12. You know, I went to Kansas State, so I didn't really like Nebraska, I didn't really like Mizzou, but we could all agree we didn't like Oklahoma. It was a little rougher than that, a lot rougher than that. But we were able to bring these groups together. This is what we were going up against. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda have modern tanks and armored personnel carriers and these heavy weapons that could reach out and touch you. So we began to prioritize and strip those off the battlefield. And then later they would surprise us with this multiple rocket launcher that appeared on the battlefield. And we went up against thousands of these fanatics. It was incredibly chaotic. So much going through your mind, you're trying to process and understand from the very first morning. But what we didn't expect was what was going to be underneath us. Horses. One of my sergeants had grown up in South Dakota of Sioux Indian heritage. He had ridden and rodeoed through high school, but that had been 6 years prior. The other 10 members of my sergeant had never ridden horses before. You know, mom and dad had taken them to a county fair or something, rode the little ponies in a circle. That doesn't quite cut it, folks. 10 of my sergeants are learning how to ride horseback in combat for the first time. How do you carry a rifle? What gear do I keep on my body? What do I leave behind where we landed? What do I put on those donkeys that are going to follow us? That first morning, we split my 12-man team into 2 6-man sections. And I would take my section and we would ride. How many in here ride horses? That first move was 4 hours. And I was anxious to keep up with General Dostum, who said he would take us to show us the Taliban. Then I realized I got to slow down. I got to coach my sergeants through this, and you're helping them mount up. And as you well know, there's no power steering on these horses. These horses were about 13 to 15 hands tall. They rode stallions culturally. And these stallions would get close to each other and they would kick or bite each other. And my sergeants have to deal with this horse that they've never ridden before. So we have to slow down and give them some riding lessons, literally at the gallop. And I realized if our combat boots got stuck in these brass stirrups and these guys get thrown or drugged, we're going to have a lot of problems in that rocky terrain. So we implemented the shoot the horse SOP, literally at the gallop. Because I knew if any one of my sergeants got hung up and we couldn't stop that animal, they were going to be killed. These guys, over the next 3 weeks, did an incredible job learning how to ride horseback day and night on cliff trails, swimming streams and rivers at night sometimes. And then there were these minefields. And can I trust the guy next to me? And that trust would be built over the next several days. The U.S. Army, in 2001, the last time they had ridden horseback in combat was in 1942 in the Pacific Theater during World War II, when a cavalry unit charged against the Japanese unit in the Philippines. So there was no manual on how to figure this out. We're having to do it, and it's the guys on the ground right then and there. No one outside of our team or that team of Americans could figure out what had to be done. Now, we would leverage our strategic assets that weren't just aircraft coming overhead. This photo depicts a bomb strike from one of those B-52 aircraft. But the real strategic asset was plugging in with these militia commanders. The folks that knew the enemy. They could tell you who we were fighting against by name. They could tell you about Al-Qaeda and what was happening. Was there going to be another attack in the United States? These are things we were trying to figure out at that time. And we began to answer a number of those questions. This is America's secret weapon. A Green Beret sergeant matched with an Afghan commander. And the template that we found after the first couple days for success, while 6 of my team were up front getting eyes on the enemy, the other 6 of my team started to meet with the locals in the area where we would landed and determine what their capabilities were, and they coordinated bringing in the logistical supplies. From my team up front, after those first couple days, my smart sergeant said, we can do this. We got to split out. 3 of us got to go deeper. This is all as the first few days, you're trying to survive the next 5 minutes. You're trying to survive the hour and figure out what we did right, what we did wrong today, and what we can do to win, because we realized we could win. But we had to send 3 guys, a risky thing. We had to send 3 guys even deeper into enemy territory. And that success of having a team of 3 Green Berets matched with an Afghan commander, the locals would rally around their commanders, and they would end up having between 300 to 750 fighters. And over the next several weeks, we rallied these ethnic leaders together, and we raised this incredible militia army. We had over 2,500 horsemen. 2,500 horsemen and 500 light infantry. That means these guys are walking in the mountains. But these horse units, these maneuver units, were organized into 4 different groups. And as that momentum grew in our success in working with the Afghans against the Taliban, as we figured things out, they sent me 2 more Air Force Special Operations guys, 2 more communications specialists. That gave me 5 SATCOM-capable radios, and the 14 of us would split into 4 3-man cells. And one of my sergeants would ride with me and General Dostum all around in between these units. The unit of measure was 7 to 24 hours as a horse ride. 7 to 24 hours in the saddle. You're not getting a good horse. That's universal, whether you're in America or in Afghanistan. When you show up with these guys as the newcomer, they're not going to give you the good horse. And one of my sergeants did so much for rapport one day. His horse, we're in a single file going down a ridge line, and he's further back in the line from me, and his horse decides it's not following the trail. Like a cougar, it starts leaping down the slope. And I'm pretty sure we're about to have the first casualty. My teammate's going to be killed. And I'm giving him words of encouragement. Lean back, hang on. That horse cut through about 3 lines, and it kept its feet miraculously. And it got to the ground, and I'm yelling at him to turn him in a left circle, turn him in a circle. And he finally gets him to slow down. And as we get down to the bottom of the hill, get to him, General Dostum rides past, says something candidly to my sergeant. An interpreter says, General Dostum says, surely you must be the best horseman in all of America. Will, my sergeant, claims what helped him in that moment was watching the movie from The Man from Snowy River, where he leaned back with his feet up around that horse's head, and he was just hanging on. I was pretty sure he was going to be killed. He did an incredible job. All of these guys did. But that became our formula for success. 3 Green Berets working closely with these commanders. They're gathering intelligence in those areas. They're the de facto commander. They're coordinating the fire and maneuver. They're coordinating the close air support. They're calling in their own logistical resupplies. And I assure you, not every day was successful. You would get beat down. You're bone tired. You're running on a few hours of sleep, reduced rations. And that's where that resilience and that commitment and that grit and determination would come in. These guys are getting snowed on. Rain, sleet, it's winter in the mountains, in the Hindu Kush. We're up around 6,000 to 8,000 feet elevation, depending on where we were working at. And these teams are dispersed. I have them dispersed across the equivalent of multiple counties. One of my 4-man teams is in what would be an adjacent province, an adjacent state. And I have to learn to trust them, as I would visit them at what I could every 3 or 4 days. That first 3-man team that went out, I saw them on day 3, and they were 14 days on their own. They're the guys that split out the deepest, calling in airstrikes and interdicting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda reinforcements before they could get into us, while the rest of the team and I, with the CIA team, were working to build this militia army. And that's the real magic of what we brought together, was these 3 different ethnic factions to get them to sit down and unite. It was like a mafia dawn meeting. There were some tense moments. These guys are all gunned up. They've got some rivalries and some old scores. But they were willing to put that aside and unite. As we're putting out these messages in the format that we're supposed to put out, I learned that after about 10 days, my command still doesn't get it. They still don't understand what we're up against. Now, when we were in isolation and planning, our commander was candid with us. There was immense political pressure to get something done. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld was calling right down to the colonel that was the commander of our task force. He was skipping over a few generals to get some answers. They didn't know what could be done, but they wanted us to do something. They wanted our Special Operations Task Force to do something. And what we thought that was we can eliminate the Taliban regime and we can start to run Al-Qaeda groups to ground. My commander was candid with us. He said, "Mark, guys, I don't expect you to survive. I don't expect you to survive. Not all of you are coming home. But I got to do something. We got to send guys in on the ground." And we said, "Sir, we got this. We know A to B. We're going to fly in on a helicopter. We're going to link up with these guys and we'll figure it out." The mission that they wanted us to do was to capture an airfield that was 100 miles away. And we'd like you to secure the road north to Uzbekistan so that international aid could come in and other American forces could come in. And we want you to provide some humanitarian aid and call these close aircraft in as you need to. But we really need to know what's going on in there. What are we up against? What can be done? As I'm trying to communicate these messages, one day after, again, little sleep, we're down to 1 ration a day, 1 military ration. We're eating 1 local Afghan cooked meal of goat and sheep or some rice. And we're losing weight. We're burning an incredible amount of calories. It's a weight loss plan that I don't advise. I lost 25 pounds like my teammates, 20 to 25 pounds in that first month. I'm a little tired, and I get this message one day, and it's essentially, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld wants to know when you're going to get to Mazar-i-Sharif. And I candidly write a message about we are advising a man and how to employ horse-mounted cavalry in the attack against armored tanks and vehicles. And I remind him of something that has not been done for decades with the invention of modern weapons. But what I also implore them is we're seeing this immeasurable amount of hope by physically being there. Didn't matter where we were, an American soldier or a CIA officer. You represented the commitment of the American government to help them. And that was incredible. And we watched their people rally around their leaders. Some of them rode horses, fathers and sons, brothers, a group of 20. They would show up every day throughout the day to rally around their leaders, and they'd bring a rifle. We used to call it a Winchester. Their rifle is an AK-47, and you will find one in just about every home to defend their family. But they were rallying around their leaders because of that hope that we found that was immeasurable. I convey that message along with some other colorful language, and the next day I'm told I need to clean up my language because this guy POTUS is reading your message traffic. Now I'm a little tired, as I said. They were telling us about these other call signs of teams that were coming in. POTUS is President of the United States. Now, a captain does not usually have the President of the United States reading his reports. But that demand for information did not slow down, but they began to understand more about what we were up against. And we realized that our messages have different meanings at different levels. We would face an incredible amount of adversity. We learned that these John Deere Gators that we acquired will float. That's not exactly in the operator's manual. We crossed a series of streams with these buggies loaded down like depicted here, and they flooded out. And then it became a push-pull event with ropes tied to a bumper, tied to my Afghan saddle that starts to split. Well, I need my saddle, I need my horse. And we end up in the river in ice-cold water swimming, 4 of my sergeants swimming these buggies across the stream. My sergeants did an incredible job getting them to restart, getting our supplies up into a nearby village. It's nightfall, we're soaking wet, we're getting hypothermic. We know we've got minutes to get dried out. We did, and then my sergeants by flashlight took these vehicles apart, let them dry out overnight, and put them back together the next morning. And we got them both to start, and we drove them another 40 miles. This is our transportation. These donkeys would bring these supplies from the drop zones up forward, and then they would become the ambulance, taking casualties back down to Special Forces aid stations where my medics are working with an Afghan doctor and about 20 personnel to stabilize these casualties. They had never had this level of battlefield trauma care. And these Special Forces medics are like gold. Their main mission is to stabilize and save our teammates for up to 24 to 72 hours so that a helicopter or someone can come in and extract us. But then they're also advising these Afghan medical personnel. It was savage, it's crude. Every member of my team participated in amputations, sucking chest wounds, battlefield blasts, and we're getting medical supplies in. But again, the Afghans had never had that level of care, and it emboldened them further. They knew the time was now to rise up against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. My guys two of my 3-man cells would link up, and they would do a 30-mile hike to catch up with us. At that point, my element was in the lead, and we've been pushing and pushing. And we had outrun our logistics. We'd missed several resupply drops. We're down to 1 radio battery between 3 of us to keep that radio functioning. That's our lifeline. We're down to the last candy bar you keep in your pocket in case you have to evade. I mean, you want to avoid capture, because you knew if you were captured, you were going to star in a horrific film. But we're out of water. And as I got 11 of my sergeants together, the first thing we did, but right prior to taking this photo, was we had to get water and get clean drinking water out of that river behind us. And we learned that leadership by example still matters. As our militia horsemen, confident, pushed ahead of us on the 9th of November, they pushed into this pass, and the enemy had mined it. And we knew it was the last major likely spot where the Taliban or Al-Qaeda would put up a fight against us. Beyond the pass lies the major city of Mazar-e-Sharif. This pass, as depicted here, is about 2 miles long and a quarter-mile wide. Our horsemen hit mines, and then the Taliban surprised us with rockets, and our force began to falter. And this is where they suffered the most casualties. We lost hundreds of our allies killed throughout the course of that mission, and hundreds more wounded. But at this place was where the chaos was most prevalent. And as this force broke, my sergeants and I rallied these guys and then led them back into the pass after we called the close airstrike on the far side. And we would capture that pass. And the next day, we would ride, in the 10th of November, we would ride into Mazar-e-Sharif, a city of over 300,000 people. And they turned out in throngs cheering us, cheering their leaders. And we would rally the local who's who of businessmen at a location. And we'd work with our Afghan commanders to go, you have to figure this out. This has to be a lasting solution, but we need the airfield secure. We need heavy construction equipment to repair the airfield. I need that road opened another 80 miles north. We need to keep the police on duty. We need to keep them paid. We need to keep the markets open, the electricity, what there was. We need to keep the lights on and begin to stabilize the security in that area. All while we're still looking for the foreign Taliban and Al-Qaeda and help us find them. Now, in the mountains, when you gather 2,500 horses and men, it requires a significant amount of water. And we fought along a valley stream. But there was very little forage. And so you're airdropping horse feed in. They purchased horse feed in Germany or Turkey and palletized it, and they're dropping it in 2,000-pound bundles to help feed these horses. As we liberate the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, now we get some ATVs. Now we have these 4x4 pickup trucks. And our militia force now has these captured tanks and vehicles, and it presents a totally different logistical challenge, needing fuel and parts to keep them going. And we would go on for another 45 days of combat operations, but with the same formula, 3 or 4 guys matched with the particular commander for that day's operations.
This kind of operation just demanded joint concepts. I mean, every service was involved in some form or fashion, and we had to work together.
Without a doubt, transformation in thinking as to how we employ our forces was just as important as any of the transformation in the technologies we used in this conflict.
I would characterize OEF as a transformational battlefield. Fusing technology and fusing command and control and fusing information flow allowed for Mazar-e-Sharif to fall as rapidly as it did and to be as decisive, because you could then transfer that ability, that technology, and that capability around through the country as we moved towards Kabul.
The area outlined in red is the 5 northern provinces that my team and 2 other Special Forces teams had the impact in. We liberated the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. We liberated those 5 northern provinces that quickly fell to friendly control. And that emboldened other militias across the force and other Special Forces teams to be sent in to work with them across the country, and they rose up against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And by the 5th of December, all the major cities in the country had fallen to friendly control. General Dostum is depicted here in the green jacket. He paid my team this incredible compliment that he had asked for a handful of Americans, but they sent me the strength of an entire nation. I've been back a number of times in uniform as a Department of Defense contractor and as a private American citizen. I've witnessed their elections, which are depicted in the upper right. They're very proud to go out and vote and have a say in their government. And I'm also proud to say that the factions that we brought together 17 years ago remain united and remain committed to being part of the political process. And they are deeply appreciative of America's support to their nation to try and help them rebuild the incredible devastation. You cannot fathom the devastation across that country. Things we take for granted. In 2001, they had maybe 200 miles of paved road. Think what that does on impacting on commerce or bringing your livestock to market. They had very little health care. The mortality rate for women in childbirth was the worst in the world then. And they've started to get education. Women and girls were not allowed to go to school under the Taliban rule. And now there are millions of boys and girls going to school. Education is the key to helping turn that around. I want to share with you a little bit about what happened to my team. In the course of our mission, Mike Spann, one of the CIA operatives, became the first American killed. He was killed by Al-Qaeda terrorists. My medical sergeant, Bill Bennett, that was one of those 3 guys that rode the deepest and went out there 14 days on their own. Bill was later killed in Iraq. It may surprise you to know that the same handful of teams from Special Forces, the same units that were instrumental in the early success in Afghanistan, were also the same teams that a year later would spearhead operations into Iraq. I had moved on to another command, but Bill and most of my teammates were still together. And 595, our team designation, would play a key role in those operations in Iraq. But Bill would be killed right at the end of that deployment. Here's our team as we were extracted in late December back to Uzbekistan, and we met with Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld. And he met every member of our team that had survived miraculously this incredible mission. And we had a pretty extensive conversation with him. This depicts a girls' school on the left that the Taliban had used as a military barracks, and my sergeants had to destroy it in the middle of the city. And I went back a year later, and our State Department had rebuilt that school. And what I found were 5,000 girls going to school there in 2 4-hour shifts. They had no electricity, no heat. They're using chalkboards, and they have this insatiable thirst for education. And I'm proud to say I've gone back a number of times as a private citizen with other Green Berets to work in rural areas in the northern parts of the country to help provide educational assistance for some of these smaller rural schools. In the last year, my team has been featured in an Emmy Award-nominated documentary called Legion of Brothers. It came out about a year ago. And it features our team and 2 other Special Forces teams. And then we had the 12-strong feature film come out that portrays the core essence of that team and our mission, partially. There are several other books about our mission out there. The Horse Soldiers, The Last Warlord, which is a favorite. It's the Afghan perspective of what it was like to have Americans come in and help them in that situation. My teammates and I are now writing our own book and talking more and more about that incredible mission, that incredible experience. Here I am with my family. Now, 17 years ago today, we were coordinating that uprising across these 5 provinces. And I got a phone call from my commander. He says, you can use the satellite phone and call home. Call your wife. I'm checking my watch. Time zone difference, about 12 hours. I got lots to do. We got a major uprising about to happen. There's still some coordination that needs done. And finally, my teammates are going, have you called home yet? Have you called home yet? I finally find a quiet place outside of a cave to use the satellite phone and call home. And my wife had gone in for her 8-month checkup, and there were complications. And the doctor said, you have 2 hours. We're delivering the baby today. And all my team wives, my teammates, all rallied around my wife in that delivery room. And then I was finally able to call home. They were already home. And that's my beautiful 17. 17-year-old daughter on the right. And those are my 2 sons and our other younger daughter. This is what I do now. I'm in a veteran-owned distillery in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm working with 6 other Green Berets that I served with. The guy on the upper right is Bob. Was my deputy commander of the horse soldiers. Our #1 product in the state of Florida right now on shelves is Horse Soldier Bourbon. And we're experiencing tremendous growth as a veteran-owned distillery. And we're going to push across other states and push into New York. And as we're growing, we've developed our e-commerce. So now you can go onto our webpage and order us. As I said, we're experiencing tremendous growth. We've had to get some superheroes in to help us bottle. It's powerful stuff. It'll put a superhero down at barrel strength. But we are having an incredible journey working together again, trying to live the American dream that we have fought to defend as veterans. And we're trying to help our fellow veterans as they transition post their service as well. And I know a number of these veterans are trying to re-enter into the farming and ranching communities that they come from or that they wish to become a part of across our great nation. I want to share with you a shameless little promotional video about our distillery.
The towers had fell when I was in high school, and I waited a year, made up my mind, and then went in.
I was one of the original soldiers that went in on the early days after the 9/11 attacks.
Every bottle that's going to go through that mold will have been touched by World Trade Center steel. As we say, kind of forged in fire, kind of like we have been throughout our careers.
It makes it so much more important for us, so much more real for us, so much more of an honor for us.
This is the American dream. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts. We've got our bottle molds made out of ground zero steel. We've got bourbon made by the guys that were on horseback over in Afghanistan.
With the statue of the horse soldiers in New York at ground zero, we all feel kind of like we're connected to it.
Each one of these bottles is its own little memorial.
All good journeys have a beginning, middle, end. They're based on history. Our story's based in history. We continue to make history, and we continue to be part of history.
How many of you have been to New York City? There's this incredible monument now that stands in a place called Liberty Park. And it's one level above the street. It's right near the old Greek Orthodox Church. It's one of the last buildings that was destroyed during 9/11 to be rebuilt. 2 years ago, Liberty Park was open to the public. And my teammates and I, along with some representatives from Afghanistan, including General Dostum's son, came and participated in a ceremony there with other special operations veterans, with NYPD police officers, with FDNY firefighters, Port Authority, and in thousands of American citizens that turned out to join us for that dedication. I encourage you to see the monument if you go to New York City. My team and I are humbled and honored that a depiction or a scene, an image from our mission has become the larger-than-life monument dedicated to our task force and to the American military men and women and intelligence community that were part of America's response.
So there's a difference between a monument and a memorial. That's why it's a monument and not a memorial.
I've been in over 15 countries throughout my career, most of them in the Middle East. We live in an incredible country. The things we take for granted, our country was founded on small towns and communities. It was founded on farming and ranching families. I'm proud to be working with the, in Kansas, north central Kansas, the Flint Hills Discovery Center to try and help bring awareness to our grasslands across Kansas and the central Midwest. I'm proud to be working with a number of Kansas farmers and ranchers to help bring awareness and education about how critical that space is. Just like other spaces in your states where you farm and ranch, you folks are the backbone of our country. And I personally thank you for what you do to feed our country, because I've been in countries where they struggle to feed their own population. You know this. But I thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the real men and the real mission. I look forward, as our distillery grows down in St. Petersburg, Florida, to having some certified Angus beef at our steakhouse. And I thank you for the opportunity to share about this. Go make your history and your legacy, as I know you are with your families. We need determined young men and women to step forth for the tough jobs. That most certainly includes farming and ranching. So thank you for what you folks do.